Howard Love, for those of you who haven't seen a bit about his work. Howard is the founder and CEO of Love to Know, a digital publishing firm with over 30 million visitors, monthly visitors. He's also a lifelong Silicon Valley entrepreneur and as well as an investor. He's been doing it for over 20 years, investing in companies, about 50 or more startups. And some of them include OpenTable, Trulia, Titan Aerospace, and Vulcan Knight. We'll get a chance to talk about some of those experiences. And his recent book, The Startup J-Curve, has been a fantastic read. Startup J-Curve, 6 Steps for Entrepreneurial Success. I think we'll get a chance to dig into some of those recommendations that are really, really good. It's a fantastic read. And of course, you got a free copy today, so we'll get a chance to spend more time with the book. And of course, try to get an autograph if you want. That's it. So please join me in welcoming Howard, and we'll just get started with the conversation.
Thank you, Carlos. Great to be here. Start up, Boston.
Yeah, so it's very traditional to start asking you a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and then how you got interested in entrepreneurship, what drove you to this world, what were the early influences, and maybe you can share with us to get started there.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways I'm super lucky because I grew up in a family that was very kind of business oriented. My grandfather was, on one side, was a Fortune 500 CEO type. My father was a Fortune 500 CEO. My other grandfather was an entrepreneur in many ways, and for example, was good friends with Tom Watson, who started IBM, was friends with a guy named, his last name is Link, Ed Link, I think, who started Link's Trainer, which became Flight Safety. He was friends with Juan Tripp, who started Pan Am. So there's, we think like today is, it's just all this startup activity, but there's been startups in America for a very long time and a lot of great ones. But so I was exposed to that my whole life, and so I always wanted to be in business. I never really thought about doing anything else. But I actually went to Phillips Exeter, not far from here, for high school, and then went to Colgate University. And by the time I got to Colgate, Exeter was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful school, and I love this whole area here. But by the time I got to Colgate, I felt like I've already been doing the school thing kind of too long, and so it actually kind of bored me, and I sort of dropped out after the first year, and I'll just go make money somehow. And that didn't work out great. Life's pretty tough out there without, a piece of parchment, and so I did end up going back to school, but one of the things I discovered during that year is I couldn't work for corporations. I thought it just didn't work at all. It was like oil and water. It didn't work. It just didn't suit my personality. It doesn't mean it isn't a wonderful, wonderful thing. And if you just the type of person who works for companies, I think that's great. But it's a lot easier, I think. But I couldn't. So I couldn't. So I went back to Colgate, and at Colgate, they had a Deck 10 mainframe, which is about the size of this room. Less computing power probably that's on our iPhones, certainly. And I was very interested in the stock market. For some reason, I became interested in the stock market at an early age, and a good friend of mine was at Colgate. He was like a computer programmer. And so I was showing him all these like cool ways you could make money with stocks. And he's like, well, I can program. And so like, God, that's awesome. We can like test all these, economic and stock market theories on data. So we did that for a couple of years and actually started a company there. And then after we graduated, the IBM PC had literally just been released. It was 1983. And so we scraped together all our money, which at the time was about, an IBM PC back then cost about $6,000. I don't know, adjusted, it's probably 30 grand today. So it's like a lot of money. And we went for the upgrade. We went for a color monitor, which was like, we dug deep. And then we also upgraded to get a second floppy drive. That was like a pretty big deal. So anyway, that was our start. And he said everything we were doing on the Decton mainframe, we could now do on the IBM PC. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. So anyway, that became our first company 13 years later. We were originally in New York City, and New York City was kind of, if you were doing startups, you were just a total loser. Like too bad you couldn't get a real job. So we ended up going to California, so we wouldn't feel like such complete losers. But actually, really, so we could hire engineers. And then that company eventually went public through a merge. We merged with another company, then went public. I went on the board, and then started doing more and more startups. And so since then, have started about 15 companies, and then started doing a lot of angel investing. Yeah, that kind of still rolling on the same program. Still can't work for anyone.
So talk a little bit about that experience. When did you went from having your own company to being able to invest, and that idea of you've been doing both almost in probably it took a long time until you were able to do that. I mean, we can.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I met my venture partners. I have a partner that I've been doing angel investing with for 20 years. And he was a buddy of mine who I'd met in New York and was one of my sort of contacts and friends when we moved out here. And he was going to Berkeley at the time, and he was doing startups. So he sort of introduced me into this. He said, hey, I got this idea, and I invested in that. Not a lot, but and then sure enough, that company did okay, and then we merged that with another company which did even better, and then that merged with another company that did even better, and then that company was bought by Expedia, which did pretty well, and so that's just started the process. And then when my original company went public, then that gave me a little liquidity that I could actually, had money to invest in. And then we just knew friends, he knew people from Berkeley, and I knew, and we just run across people, and we just, would invest and start helping them out. There weren't any angel networks. I don't even know if we were called angels back then. I guess we were, but and then it's just kind of continued, and I'm just blown away now that that it's become things like the startup grind. And Boston, by the way, always had a fairly decent startup community, because Lotus 1-2-3 and Mitch Capor, he was one of the guys we all wanted to be like. That was in the sort of mid to late 80s. But it's just amazing the way it's grown up and sort of exploded all over. I was in 2 months ago. I was in Barcelona. I was in Helsinki. In Helsinki, they have a conference called Slush, which is pretty cool, by the way, if you ever want to go. They have 25,000 entrepreneurs, from around Europe. In Barcelona, I met with a startup grind guy there, and then it's amazing how this has just become such a huge thing all over the world.
So we can talk about that a little bit more. But so was it part of the success of your first company that allowed you to invest, or were you doing both? You had some resources to invest, and you were learning as an investor or as an entrepreneur, or was it your first entrepreneurial success that give you confidence and say, okay, I know now how it works, and I'm able to put some money into this, or were you doing always in parallel? Because
yeah, I always did it in parallel, because first of all, just being quote an angel investor, it doesn't pay great. I mean, in the sense that it's like it can't really be qualified as a job, because here's what happens. What happens is, you lay out a lot of money, you lay out a lot of time, and it's all feast or famine. It's all, just talking purely and honestly as an angel investor, a guy who's been doing it for 20 years. It's tough, and it's feast or famine, and it's boom bust. So So you could put out money and time for, 5, 6, 7 years, and it's not like there's a little coming back. There's just nothing. Just nothing. And then 1 year you could have pop, 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 and you got all your money back and then some. And you average it out, like, oh, great return. It's like, well, yeah, but so it's kind of good to keep your day job. If nothing else, just so the wife doesn't think that you're just sort of being a dilettante. It is. No, this has actually taken me a long time, a very long time to figure out. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little glimpse into what I would call advanced angel investing. So I'll save you 20 years of trying to figure this out. If you're serious about angel investing, what you really want is you want a steady source of cash, like cash flow. So this is really odd. The perfect angel investment portfolio is like a chain of Taco Bells and and a portfolio of angel investments. Because the Taco Bells just keep sending you checks, it's like a great cash flow business, and then you can put the checks to work. But I say that, it's absolutely true, by the way. Or if you have some, big, huge pop and you don't know what to do with all your money, I suppose that works too. But if you think about it, so I've studied Warren Buffett forever and had the chance to meet him once or twice and been to Omaha and all the annual meetings. It'll go down as one of the great investors of our age, if not ever. But if you really break down what he does, he's got cash flow businesses that send him checks, and then he's got investments that he never sells. It's kind of the perfect way to make money. And the conclusion that my partner and I came to is actually the same thing. You want businesses that are cash flow businesses, and then use that to invest, and you can build a phenomenal angel portfolio doing that. And by the way, I'm going to digress just for 1/2 second. It doesn't actually have to be Taco Bells. I use that as sort of a fun example. But and I talk about this regularly, and I mention it because I think it's a super important point for all you folks. I hate to see people look at startups kind of monolithically and like there's one way to do it, which is I get my idea, I raise my angel money, then I create the product out, then I do my Series A, Series B, and then I go public. There's this narrative that that's the story, that's what you do. And if you don't do that, you're a loser, right? If you don't do that, I don't know, I guess you should feel insecure or something. And it's a horrible way to really look at things. I like to sort of, preach a much more expansive view of startups. And you could even say startups / small businesses. I love, so what we do, we look at startups, and so a lot of folks certainly on the venture side, and definitely on the professional venture side, and almost all angels, I'm not going to say all of them, but most angels, they're looking for can your company completely change the world and transform business as we know it and disrupt, blah, 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 blah.
Radical innovation.
Radical innovation. Because if it doesn't do that, I have no interest, right? Because if it doesn't do that, I can't turn my 25 grand into $1 billion, right? Which is technically true. Right? But we don't look at life that way. We look at there are so many wonderful businesses that you can start, and it's not going to turn 25 grand into $1 billion. But it can turn that 25 grand into ever increasing numbers, and also it could do lots of things. It could cash flow. Right? We love cash flow businesses, so we actually do tech startups that send us checks. It's unheard of, but it's wonderful. And they're organized as sub-S's or partnerships or LLCs or whatever, and incredibly tax efficient. And they grow, and we love them to bits. They're amazing. And they, and so when you think about your business, I think people are always trying to jam this. They might have a perfectly wonderful business, but they're trying to jam it into this perceived startup model, which I think is a huge mistake. Just figure out what the right form is for your business. Don't be insecure about it. Feel like $1 million. and go make $1 million, and then pay yourself $1 million, and then go spend $1 million. I mean, just like it doesn't have to be this just one thing. So I just think that's such an important part. So actually, my partner and I, knock on wood. I mean, we have a group of businesses. In fact, I'm going down to Charlotte to see one tomorrow. They're not going to be going public, probably, but they are quite profitable. They're great businesses, wonderful people who run them. We love being in business with them, and they will distribute, and they do distribute, and it's great. And then I also invest in businesses that are clearly never going to distribute. It's not going to happen. They're either going to go public, get bought, or go bust. It's a binary event. And it's good to have a balance. If all you had were those businesses that are like binary, never going to pick, then good luck. I can tell you what's going to happen. You're going to go through, 5, 6, 7 years of famine, and then, you might get the pop. But it's not a great way to live, necessarily.
Yes, so that's great because you're talking about it's not just one narrative about how entrepreneurial startup success might happen, or what is deemed success. I wonder to keep the conversation on the investment side for a moment.
Yeah.
How has angel investment changed over the years? You've been doing it for a long time, and I'm guessing right now it's going crazy and expanding it. But maybe just for maybe you have people here who don't exactly know the difference between angel investment and venture capital, if you can touch upon that. But in your own experience, how is that different today? Is it and maybe also why have you focused on angel investment at the early stage, other than the more advanced mature companies? And I just hear that a bit because you have been doing it for a long time, and I wonder if it's very different now from what it was when you started.
Yeah. I'm going to break that down into a couple of different things. I'm going to take an easy one first, which is why do I stick with the super early stage as opposed to later stage? That's the easy one because that's just my background. My background and where I can add value is on the super early stage. Once you're off and running and you're scaling and everything, absolutely. I'd like to think I can help out, but in that super early stage where frankly it's really hard and it's the hardest, and that's why the J curve, which we'll get to, that's why it goes down. It goes down for a reason. It doesn't go like that. It goes down because everyone goes through this, and that's what I call the valley of death and a long cold winter, and it's where startups go to die or they live. And I prefer to play in that area because that's where it's toughest, and that's where I feel I can add the most value and can sort of affect the most positive change. And also, purely from a sort of selfish economic standpoint, the earlier you invest, the more you get. It's that simple, and that's always been the case. And so, I would much rather, put $100,000 down and get 10% of the company, or 20 or 30, depending on how early, rather than Series A, $100,000 gets you half of 1%. Like, not interesting. It's just not to me. It doesn't mean it can't be perfectly fine, but it's just not interesting. And also, as you invest later and later on, and there's more people there and everything else, you have less influence, and because you're frankly just not that needed, and you may or may not be, and the person may or may not, the entrepreneurs may or may not listen to you, but it's very, very frustrating. I can tell you as an angel investor, venture investor, whatever, it's super, super frustrating when you see a company making, fairly classic mistakes, and you just want to shake them, and you know what to tell them, and you make that call, and they're just nodding you to death, and they're not going to do a goddamn thing, and your little investment's just going, it's going to be a zero, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's frustrating. If you're in earlier on and you have sort of a good, tight bond, hopefully a good working relationship,
and you've been part of forming that company, and for that matter, mentoring the entrepreneur, those conversations, they're going to listen more. I'm never under the assumption that, I never fool myself like, I'm not running the company. And ultimately, if the entrepreneur wants to say, that's nice, I don't want to do that, I'm good with that. It obviously happens all day long. But I just prefer to have more impact, more influence, more control, if you will, over the success. And I think that's one of the reasons why my partner and I have had, we've been really blessed with an incredible success rate. I mean, I was listening to a video of Elon Musk yesterday. He's like, well, 9 out of 10 fail. I'm like, if you do what Elon does, I suppose that's true, but ours don't. And which I'm not bragging, I'm just very proud of that, because number one, we open ourselves to what I would say are lower risk, potentially lower outcome, but lower risk, just as rewarding businesses, right? So our odds go up just from that. It's just whatever, pure economics. And then I like to think our odds go up because we're highly involved at those early stages where most startups do die.
Great. So it's interesting. You have a broad view of what a portfolio should be like. But are there common things you look for in startups, entrepreneurs? What are the things that you're always keen in working with a startup? What are the things you look for that are really important, even if it's broad at very different companies?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm getting involved, in a significant way with a startup, the first thing I look at is like, I'm going to be with these folks a long time, right? And it's like a little bit like choosing a roommate. Like, you better like them, and you better get along with them, and they hopefully aren't obnoxious or piss you off or whatever. I mean, you're going to be living with them. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. And particularly if you're in that super early, right? If you're just spray and pray, do you guys know what spray and pray investing is? Spray and pray is where you write your 25 grand, you sort of throw it over the transom and you run, and then you go do it again. And everyone gets 10 grand and you do it 100 times or whatever it is. We just don't do that. If you're doing spray and pray, whatever, big hugs. Hope it works. But we don't, and so we put more money into fewer companies. So you gotta like the people, and you gotta be enthusiastic, I think, and this is true for entrepreneurs, you gotta be enthusiastic about what that company is doing. You gotta get fired up for it. Primarily what we look at is the people, because the horse has changed, but you can't really change the jockey. There's no such thing as swapping out the founders. It just doesn't really work. It's not that it isn't done from time to time, but it almost always fails. So you're stuck with them. So we go with a jockey, and one of the things about the book, the startup Jaker, the book predicts, and it's a fundamental fundamental thesis of the book, that the original business plan doesn't work. So it's not to say that we don't look at the business plan. We definitely do, because that'll describe the general market, the general problem that's trying to be solved, and things like that. And it's also a good indication if that will show if the entrepreneur is really and the founding team has really thought things through, and it just gives you an indication of how they think. So we love the pitches. I don't look at the finances at all, but the hockey stick graphs that always have you at 70% net profit margins, which I'll point out no company in the entire public markets has. But so I don't look at certain slides, but you gotta but the people are a long shot the number one thing, and then if you break that down, you're like, what do you look for in people? I like them to be positive, resourceful. Turns out to be a really big thing, because you're always going to be under-resourced, and usually severely under-resourced as a startup. So are you resourceful with your few resources? Big deal. People have high energy, who take ownership, who are smart, preferably they can sell a little bit, and just are super fired up and passionate about about what they're going to do, and like they have a history of doing stuff, and you can meet people and you're like, yeah, they're probably going to do it. They're going to do something. So yeah, that's what we look.
So let's talk. You just mentioned the J curve, and let's start talking about that. I think it would be good if you could explain what does the J curve mean, and why did you chose that particular shape, and talk about the different stages, and we can dig into each one of those.
Yeah. So startup J curve describes the entrepreneurial journey. It is a map for a startup, and this came about because my venture partner and I, we were just talking about this business or that business, and we just had seen dozens and dozens and invested in many of them. And we were just talking about how, and I think it was in reference to a particular company, like, yeah, they're kind of sucking it right now, but I think they got a decent chance of coming out, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll remember this, how we were just about to shut that down, and remember that, and we did 15 minutes of, remember when this company was screwed and that company was screwed, and most of which went on to do wonderful things. But at the time, it just looked pretty damn horrible. And so, I was like, yeah, I think this just pretty much happens all the time, everyone. And so we put on a conference once a year where we get our most important to us, 12, 13, 14 CEOs of startups, and we bring them together for a couple of days to sort of help one another out and problem solve and stuff like that, and get updates on the business. So anyway, my partner asked me to give a talk, which I didn't like the idea, but I'm like, well, I'll just talk about that. And so I just started sketching it out, and that ultimately became the J curve. And as I gave the speech to the CEOs who were seasoned startup CEOs, they're like, yeah, that's pretty much it. And they're taking pictures of the slides and stuff like that. So I'm like, I don't know, maybe there's something here. And then so I gave a talk later on one of the particular stages 2 years later, and they loved it just as much. And they're taking pictures, and they all wanted a copy of the deck and everything else. So I finally decided, I'll just make the book. So what the startup J curve is it's a J. And what it means is you start off, and when you start off, everything is great. I mean, it's a PowerPoint deck. If you don't like something, you just change it. If an investor doesn't like something, you just, change the number. It's really cool, and it's very kind of fun and exciting. We've all been there. Everyone in the room, I bet, right? I got this idea. I was like, yeah. And you're kind of high-fiving, and the energy's flowing and everything else. And then, so that's great. That's like right here. And then, most people think it's like, oh, and it's just going to get better from here, right? Because we get to build a product, we'll raise money, and we'll da-da-da-da-da-da, and then, we'll release the product, and then we'll get sales, and then it'll all hockey stick at the end, and we'll end up, on our Paradise Island. And it just never works that way. Turns out that initial euphoria is a bit of a high point, and then it kind of gets generally worse from there, both emotionally, financially, and otherwise. And then it kind of dips down, and then this is a long cold winter, and then it starts gradually going up, and then only years later do you end up actually feeling as good as you did those first days. And then it goes up. So I divided it up into 6 stages to help understand it, because they really are. Those are like the 6 critical stages. And it's create, and create is when you come up, you create the product, the idea, the team, hopefully you raise a little bit of money. That's create. And you have release. And release turns out to be a very difficult thing to do. Lots of reasons why, fear of failure, fear of being judged, perfectionism, lack of tight product spec, it's kind of endless. And now we're going down, right? Because we've all been through that release cycle, and like the goddamn product isn't coming out, and it's taking much longer, and it's taking a lot more money, and shit, we're running out of money, and blah, blah, blah. And this is down here. And then from release, you go into morph, because the ultimate low point is when you release your product, and you think that's actually going to save everything, and it turns out nobody gives a damn. First product releases almost never work. They almost never get traction. And that's, that's tough.
Now,
Because you're about out of money and everything else, right? And but there's a way to handle that, and that's probably the most important chapter of the book is what I call the morph chapter, and that's the third phase, which is where you figure out what is working about the product, what isn't working, you do more of what is working, less of what isn't working, and you sort of iterate that through 1, 2, 5, 20 times, whatever it is. And then, you're done with morph when you get significant customer traction, because you have nothing, you certainly don't have a business unless you have significant customer traction. And then after the morph phase, which is phase 3, you go into phase 4, which is model. And model is where you say, well, okay, I got a product, I got customers, so how am I going to make money? And I suggest that don't worry too much about the model prior to that, because you don't know what the product is. So don't waste too much time on it. And then model, and there's a whole sort of methodology for going through and finding the right model and making sure it's a good model with the highest margins you can get, although it's not going to be 70% net. And then you go, once you have the model down, you go into the 5th phase, step, which is scale. Right? Now it's time to blow it out. And you always have to nail it before you scale it. So you can't, the biggest mistake, the largest cause of startup death is scaling before you nail it. It's a proven fact. Data always shows that people, it's like the product isn't working, just scale it up. We need more salesmen. We need a bigger marketing budget. It doesn't help. And so then you scale, and there's lots of challenges associated with that. For scaling, you need people, process, and money. We can get into a lot of those challenges. And then after scale, you have harvest. And harvest is when you are genuinely producing profits. And harvest is this sort of, nirvana, where you have puffball decisions like, what do I do with all this money? That's kind of where we all want to get, where you want every business to get to. And so that's where you might sell the company, you might do an IPO, you might do distributions, back to Howard, and stuff like that, or do acquisitions, and that's what I would call the harvest phase. So you divide it up into that, and the shape, and that creates a map, so you know what to do, when to do it, you know where you stand at any given time. And with everyone in this room, if you have a business, I could spend 2 minutes and I can tell you exactly where you're at, which is not hard. People always try and fudge it, by the way. They always think they're 2 steps ahead. So you have to kind of be intellectually honest about it. But that's it.
So a big point of the book seems to be also that, a little bit what you're talking about, that there's a lot of distraction or anticipation or desire to be thinking ahead of where you should be focusing on it. Is that is that a big part of the core point, that you should be spending more time realizing where you're at and really worrying about the next step? And do you see that as a common mistake for entrepreneurs that do a lot of that?
Yeah, look, startup by definition, you have extreme scarcity of resources. You just do. And don't think you're special. Nobody had resources. It's just, everyone's like, oh, almost out of money. I'm like, you and everyone else. It's never about money, by the way. Startups don't fail from lack of money. This is one of the most, it is the most common misperception out there. If I just could get another investor, I'm good. I've actually rarely seen companies fail because of lack of money. Just kind of an interesting side point. But yes, the point is, you have extremely limited resources. You need to focus all those resources on the task at hand. And at any given point in your company life cycle, there's only a couple of things to be doing. And you need to do those, and you need to nail them. If you do not nail them, you can't go to the next step, and you'll fail. to certainty. And so just knowing where you are and having the discipline to zero in on what you need to do at that particular point in time and how to do it. Because by the way, for each of these phases, there's like pretty known things to do, and I think most of them in the book. Like, this is what you do. Like, this is how you solve this problem, and this is what, you know, and obviously they don't not get into product specific stuff, but like there are tricks, you know, and like methods to get through this, and you need to, as a startup, focus all your energy on the task at hand and not worry about the next two phases and not worry about the previous. I mean, just go through it, and like it works.
Let's talk about some of those. Maybe, for example, early stage, the create phase, when you're, you mentioned at the beginning a little bit about making sure that you like people you work with and that the team is right. Is the team more important than the idea? Does the product concept or the service concept really matter the most? What is that essential thing that needs to be there at the creation phase? I mean, everybody's excited and high-fiving and they're all excited about the idea, but of all those things that are there, what is the most important at that stage? I guess there's a lot of people in the audience that are at that stage, so I wonder if that...
Yeah, well, in the create phase, I'm going to go back to people, but the most important thing, so let's say you've already chosen yourself as one of those people, presumably. The most important thing in the create phase, by a long shot, is, you know, who are you going to work with? So who's your founding team? And specifically, you know, are you going to have who's your co-founder? I don't even want to ask, are you going to have a co-founder? Like, you really should have a co-founder. You know, solo acts are done. I've done solo acts. They're hard. You could pick out a small handful of successful solo acts, maybe Jeff Bezos, but they're rare. You know, Google is not Sergey; it's Sergey and Larry. Yahoo's not, you know, Dave Filo; it's Dave Filo and Jerry Yang. Microsoft seemed like Bill Gates, but it wasn't. It was Bill Gates and Paul Allen, and later Steve Ballmer. Apple, right? Apple was not Steve. Huh? Yeah, right. Yeah, it was Wozniak, right? And Steve was just a good talker without Woz, right? And so picking a co-founder, and I've had a couple of companies. One we had to kind of put to bed last year, and I think it was a good friend of mine, still is, and I think the business would have had a pretty good chance of success, but he didn't have a co-founder, and he kind of refused to get one. And so he had all the skills for one thing, but in this particular case, it just lacked the sales and marketing skills. And so the product never got out there. He's a great product. Nobody cared. It never got out there. And I couldn't get him to get a great guy, but I just couldn't. If he would have had a co-founder who complemented his skills, I think the company had a very good chance. But it became obvious. The problem wasn't the product. The problem was it was just lack of co-founder. So I mean, and it's also, I've read studies on this. 2 founders do better than 1. They just do. 3 founders, still better than 1, not as good as 2. 4 or 5 founders, now you're getting a little soupy. You're going to have a problem making decisions. So, the 2 founders, you read about, like, Woz and Steve, they had their arguments. You had, Bill Gates was famous for arguing with Paul Allen, like, top of their lungs, right? But these arguments produce better decisions. And having someone you could bounce your ideas off of do produce better decisions. And having someone with a complementary skill set to yours makes a stronger founding team, because then they're covering all sorts of areas that you can't. Having someone just like yourself, maybe that doesn't really do much good. But, so you asked a great question, what's the most important thing during that create phase? I haven't even mentioned the idea. Like, honestly, if we sat here long enough, I could come up with 10 ideas, and so could you. Ideas are not the hard part, oddly. I don't think. I mean, there's a difference between a good idea and a bad idea. I understand that. But the people ultimately can take a mediocre idea and execute on it phenomenally, and suddenly it looks like a genius idea.
So let's talk a little bit about further down the curve. You've launched the product, the team is the right one.
We should turn the lights down or something, like the long cold winter. It's getting
correct. Yeah. But listen, you've proven some things about the product. You launched something, you were able to test, and now you're in the morph stage. It's a chance to make some decisions. What are the things that are really important to focus on? Why change? What to change? I guess it's product specific, but are there some key things to pay attention to at that stage where you're able to release something out into the world? And what would you say are the most common things that people miss or that they should be focusing on in that stage?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing to first is just to let's put ourselves in that situation for a second. You just poured your heart and soul into this thing. You told investors it's going to be freaking genius. Blah 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 blah. You release this thing and it just hits with a thud. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, it's devastating. It's devastating. It's just so most people. They want to just keep pushing it. We just, must be we need a little more. If we only had a good sales guy around here. If we only bought more Google clicks. And so the most common mistake is people just hang on to that original idea. They hang on to that original business plan, and they just keep pushing on it. But it's not going to go anywhere. And mind you, there's exceptions to all these things, but generally speaking, you need to let go of all your original preconceptions. Usually you don't want to let go of the mission. So by all means, stay passionate about the mission, but your little vehicle to accomplish that mission just is probably not going to work. So the most important thing there is, again, there's usually always a bright light or a small faint light of all the stuff they don't like. There might be one thing that people really seem to want and need. And so the idea is to figure out what that is and watch the data really closely from your users and talk to your users, and then morph that your product into that, which is a different thing. Now you can't do it if you're SpaceX, really. Although you could argue that in a way that had morphed a number of times before Elon even decided to do it himself. Same with Tesla. But if you look at, for example, Slack. What was Slack? Slack was a massive multiplayer online game. Right? It was a failure. They raised a bunch of money and it was not going to work. But they had this little chat feature that they had, I think, for the game, and they used it internally to run their company. And they're like, all right, the game's not going to work. Maybe this little messaging thing might work, and that's Slack. Odeo was originally a podcasting platform that and then Apple came out with all this stuff and it wasn't going to work. So one of the founders says, well, I got this crazy idea of status updates, only 140 characters, they're going to try it. And that became Twitter. Twitter, again, was born out of complete failure. PayPal originally was an online way to was made for Palm Pilots, and it was a secure way to do something, and that didn't work, and that became PayPal. What are some others? It's kind of endless. I was just listening to there's a cool little YouTube video. Does anyone know Minted? The stationary guys, Minted. It's kind of pretty cool. They've been very successful. She originally started it. And this is not a massive morph, but it's a morph. Her business model was that she was going to get she was giving an online place where you could get to solve all your stationery needs. So she was giving a Crane and all the big stationery makers in there, and cards and Hallmark, or I don't know what. And she would offer those, and that didn't work at all. But one of the little things she did is she did a competition for designs for stationery and cards, and like those things, she noticed like 1 week, they had like 3 sales of that as opposed to 1 sale of all this other inventory they had. And it's like, maybe we should do that more. So they promoted that more on the site. The 3 sales became 5 sales, and the 5 sales became 10, and now they're a multi-$100-million company. So if you push, William Wrigley this is one of my favorites. He was actually in the business of baking soda. And in order to sell his baking soda, he included a pack of gum. And everyone went for the gum. So he dumped baking soda. He became a gum company. So I mean, if you look at all these things, and you get through the sort of whatever narrative, like, oh, they must have just taken off and gone to the moon. It's almost never the case, and there were very dark moments.
So it's advisable to set yourself up to be able to track what's working inside the startup, and what are the things that are actually gaining traction and attention. And all that.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we can open it up for more of a dialogue with the audience.
By the way, while we're sort of down in the valley of death, just so you know, like, I don't know, that you're in good company, with all this stuff. I was listening to a lot of Elon Musk stuff. I just think he's just fascinating fellow in so many ways. But he actually gave. I like woke my wife up because like he just described the J curve. Because he's like, yeah, at the beginning you're just really happy, like everyone, you're really giddy, and he's like, it's all downhill from there. and then and he says, because problems happen, and you start like having to deal with problems, and before you know it, you're like running around all day dealing with problems, and you're running out of money and everything else, and he's on record as saying that at the bottom, and I'm trying to remember the years, it was 2008. They were pretty much out of money, and he said he was as close. He said he kind of looking at his situation, like, and himself. And he's like, there's a pretty good chance I have a mental breakdown here. This is a guy who can take stress and pressure, and he's like, yeah, this could all come. He was thinking himself, he could come unglued here, and he's on record saying that a number of times, and he says it openly, and he often equates startups to eating glass and looking into the abyss. And this is the most successful, arguably, startup guy of our time. And certainly one of them. And so, like, that's just the journey, And I think he qualified looking into the abyss is because you are frequently thinking you're going to go out of business. And I think the eating glass part comes from you're just working on really hard problems that you don't really want to work on all the time. So anyway, that's from the most successful startup guy out there today. So. And he's, and then he's like, yeah, and then later on it gets pretty good.
So what are the signs that it's getting good? I mean, so you're talking about this in a very linear fashion. I think that's part of the argument. That is, if you're focusing at each stage, it's kind of there's a natural order to it, but at some point you realize that you describe it as a modeling. Now you have something that is going to work, and you're trying to figure out then how to make money. So I think that's also probably very valuable to some of the folks that are here. So what are some of those indications when okay, there's something here I have to start putting more energy into figuring out, even before scaling, but like you said, you have to nail that, make sure that this is the right business model for the product. What are some of those things that you can look for at that stage?
Well, I mean, I don't want to paint like too grim a picture. Truth is, when you start getting customers, that's really cool. I mean, there's something very, very, fulfilling and kind of, confirming about other people really like buying your thing and using it. And oddly, often your first reaction is, I can't believe people are buying this. But they do, and it's cool. And it's cool when, customers are grooving on what you put together. That's wonderful. And but then you have another tough problem, like how do you make money at it? So then you're going into models where you're trying to figure out how to make money. And I think the biggest mistake that people make in model is they like blast right through it. They're like, nope, we do this. And there's such a huge difference between businesses and startups that have good margins and businesses that don't. It's night and day. Businesses that with lousy margins are a pain in the ass, and they're always a pain in the ass. Because you can't make mistakes. And anytime you make a mistake, you're like, whoop, you could be going out of business, and you get massive fire drills. And I hate them. I don't like I love businesses with big fat margins, primarily so you can make a mistake. Or you can take exogenous events that happen that are completely out of your control. They tend to be much more durable. And what I've found is what I've found is that it's incredibly common for founders, almost always, they're not really spending enough time on the model and really giving deep thought about how to optimize it, and not necessarily taking what are considered the generally accepted models for that particular business. You think of Google, right? So they developed this software, and I remember using it before they had any advertising, back when it was still goofy. And but it was good. It worked. I mean, that sucker worked. And their business model was actually that they thought they were just going to take that and license it to Yahoo or the other search engines. Generally accepted wisdom, by the way, at the time was that search engine stuff was over completely. Like, just wasn't that big a deal. Wasn't that big a value add, and it had been done. Hotbot. AltaVista, Yahoo kind of owned it, and it was like, they had a very hard time raising money. Eventually, they obviously got it, but so anyway, Google, if you run a search engine, you just literally the homepage with ads. That's like how you made money. Or in their case, they're like, we'll just license it to these guys. They're actually turned down for licensing. Long story short, they really, if you think about it, they really got traction. They really nailed the product, and then they came up with this, very innovative way to monetize, which was AdWords, which originally was Overture had kind of come up with the idea, and Overture was bought by Yahoo, which was smart. But eventually, but I think at the time Overture was still an independent company, and I don't know if Google tried to buy them or not, but Google looked at that and said, yeah, that's a pretty smart way to do it. And then so they did that, and Google has had amazing margins for 15 years now. Still do. Primarily because they really focus on them. If they're just putting banner ads on the homepage, they're not Google. It might still be a great search engine, might still be, worth a few $10 million, but, not the 200 billion.
So I wanted to ask you a last question to get your perspective in terms of your experience. You mentioned earlier you started in New York, and here in this area in your education, your first startup in New York, and you moved to the West Coast. You also mentioned you've been traveling around recently. So I wanted to ask you about how do you see the landscape for entrepreneurs changing? There's a lot of things going on. There's a big growth in terms of programs and resources, and it's becoming a lot more available for people to understand and learn and get. So do you see that trend growing and sustaining itself, and the different?
What trend?
That idea of there's more programs, there's more events, there's more and more of it. And what are the biggest difference that you're seeing here in the U.S.? You've been able to travel around different places. Are they specializing in different cities, or is it becoming a lot more the Silicon Valley model becoming the rule, the norm everywhere? Or are there very specific cultural things that matter a lot in different places? I mean, you've been in all these locations at different stages of your life, so I was wondering if you could talk about that. both here in the U.S. and as you travel abroad, so you could grow outside?
Yeah, that's a complicated deal. I've given it a lot of thought, actually. First of all, it's interesting because almost every place I go to, like tonight, you get talking to people, and eventually they just spit it out. They're like, "Well, I really want to go to Silicon Valley," and you're like, and I'm always like, "Why?" Silicon Valley's a cool place, and by all means, if you have a startup, you should visit there a lot and develop contacts. But it's I think it's not such a great place to do a startup right now. I don't do any startups there, actually. I live there, but I would not start a company there. You think about startup. What's important? Cash. Runway, things like that, and Silicon Valley is just going to torch all those in very short order. So I actually think I'm kind of old-fashioned. I think keeping costs low is super important and useful at the early stages of a startup. But it doesn't stop. Every place like this in the world I've been to, they all have sort of Silicon Valley envy, which is I think uncalled for. I mean, Silicon Valley is a very special place. It'll never be, it'll always be number one. It's not turning around and going the other way. And when I moved out there in '91, by the way, I was in a pretty severe recession, and many of the buildings were bankrupt, office buildings and everything. People forget, it's all boom busts. Technology is a boom bust cycle. We're obviously at the height of a boom, it will bust, and then it'll boom again. Just be prepared for that. There's no such thing as a one-way ticket. I've gone, 91 bust, that then massive boom, ending in one of the great bubbles of all time in 2000, 2001, 2002 bust, run up to 06, 07, bust, run up to 17. So we're a little long in the tooth here. It's going to be, of course, there's going to be a bust. It's a certainty. But you shouldn't let it worry you. I mean, if you're dedicated to being an entrepreneur, then just whatever. Bust can be great. All sorts of resources available. People that were not previously available. Cheap computers, I remember in the bust of 0102, you literally buy rooms full of Sun servers that were on allocation to, a year and a half ago. And you could buy them for nothing. So a bust is not a bad thing. But anyway, long-term trend is obviously up and to the right. Technology is a great place to be. Startups, obviously the trend is up and to the right. There's just more and more and more. Like I say, it was completely uncool when I was in New York in the late 80s. And now New York is probably number 2 in the country and maybe the world. Well, it is probably number 2. It is number 2 in the country and the world, as far as I can tell. And probably eclipsed Seattle. It certainly has eclipsed Seattle actually at this point. And then you got Seattle, and you got Texas, you got Austin, you got Boston, as they actually has very strong roots in a startup tradition. I was over in Barcelona, blown away. I think actually phenomenal things are going to happen in Barcelona. It's a great climate for it, wonderful people, and very similar to San Francisco in a lot of ways. Helsinki, go figure. They got it going on there. It's going on everywhere. I think so all this is going to continue, and there are going to be startups in Boston in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, and there's going to be a lot more than there are today. But I think 2 things. Number one, if you're in Boston or you're in Barcelona or whatever, by all means stay in touch with Silicon Valley and so forth, but don't do that knee-jerk, like, I'm not as good as them, I'm not as cool as them, I should be in Silicon Valley. It's just not at all true. I don't think. I firmly don't think, and that's right, and I don't even invest that much in Silicon Valley anymore. It's just everything's overpriced and kind of overhyped and everything else. I still do, don't get me wrong, but it's just, I'm not particularly smitten by the whole thing. So I think if you have a startup and you're in Boston, awesome. Think about it. You got MIT's 2 blocks from here, for God's sakes. If those guys can't program, I mean, who can, right? You've got Harvard a little further down, a couple of smart folks out of there. And of course, you know, Microsoft came out of Harvard, and Facebook came out of Harvard, right? And you know, so you guys have as much going on here as if you think about it, as anywhere. So I think that, you know, look, the trend goes up on the right. You know, I think that places would do well to embrace the local resources they have and not trying to be someone else. And I think Barcelona is doing that, and I think it's going to work out pretty damn well there. And that's the advice I would give you know, all the startup communities out there. I think, Carlos, what you're doing here at Startup Grind is phenomenal. Just bringing people together, telling stories, and you know, helping people out and saving them, hopefully, you know, years of pain and suffering, that, you know, and so they can get to success quicker. And so I've got great admiration for what you guys are doing, and I love being here and, you know, helping out in whatever small way. But thank you so much for having me.
Oh, great, thank you for being here. So with that, let's open up to the people that matter here. Some questions, and I'll pass the microphone around, and I'll share mine.
So, what would be your criteria for choosing founders or teams that you invest in?
Guys or gals who will make me a lot of money. No. The criteria is, I mean, this is the hard thing about startups, and I was talking about it with some of the guys here earlier. You know, look, I'm 56 years old. I've been doing startups for 35 years, been angel investor for 20 years, and I don't really, I mean, I wrote the book, so to speak, but I can't tell you precisely. I can tell you certain traits are super useful and that I would look for, and I mentioned some of those, which is resourcefulness. Somebody who just like gets it done, like kind of standard stuff, like they follow up, you know. They've got a clear pitch. They can convince others about their I'm sorry?
Maybe then a different question, like what turns you off maybe easier?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Can you repeat that?
What turns me off as an investor? Probably the number one turn off for me, which is just it's a flat no. I mean, I'm trying not to be rude, but I might as well just hang up at that point, or walk out of the room. Is when someone says, yeah, you know, hey, it's an X billion-dollar market. I think we can get, you know, sort of 1, 2, 3% of 3, and then I think we can sell this thing. And I'm like, good luck. You know, not with me. You know, I hate that. I hate that. And I'm sure guys like, well, like, why don't you like that? They want to build it and sell it for 10, 20 million bucks or whatever. I hate it. Because it's never going to work. And if you aren't kind of dug in for the long haul, and it's okay to think about, I don't know, maybe one day we might get bought, that's fine. But you throw that into your pitch, like up front, it's like, oh, it's just the worst, probably the worst possible thing you do. Because why? Because, you know, it's so hard that if that person isn't committed, and I would argue that someone who says we're going to build this up in 10, 20 million bucks and then flip it, that is not committed, right? They really don't give a shit. They think it's some easy way to make money, which it's not. So they are never going to go through that long cold winter. They're not going to make it. They're going to be right to the doors in 10 minutes when the going really gets tough, and it's a certainty the going's going to get tough. So they better have a lot of resilience, a lot of commitment, a lot of passion, and don't stop. And you know, as I was listening to these Elon Musk sort of series of interviews, and it's fun, by the way. I love YouTube. You just go on there, you type in Elon Musk, and you know, it's just great. You sit there and watch 20 interviews, and it's really interesting. He says regularly, he's like, yeah, well, here's the thing. If you work 100 hours a week and the other guy's only doing 40, then you can do in 4 months what they do in 12. And he says it's like and the amazing thing is, it's like so simple, And it's so true. And you know what? That's what he's doing. And that's how he can run two of the most probably difficult companies to run in the country right now, sending rockets up and building cars. He's working 100 hours a week. So I'd love to see an entrepreneur who's working 100 hours a week. And you know what? I'm going to be really honest with you. There are not that many of them. A lot of them are not. But the guys who, when I say guys, I always mean guys and gals. I love investing in women. I've invested in many women founders and will continue to do so. And a number of them have done incredibly well. It's really hard. And, think about 80 or 100 hours. I mean, how's that look? Frankly, I was listening, I'm like, God, you're slacking off. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing 80 hours anymore. I'm doing 60. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not doing 80. I'm like, maybe I should get back to 80. But yeah, that's the kind of hard work that I think it takes. Resilience, resourcefulness, smarts. I downplay smarts a little bit, but probably too much. I mean, smarts is important. It's obviously, it's a big advantage to be smart. By the way, it's a disadvantage to be too smart, it turns out. Those folks tend to act like research scientists, which is kiss of death for any startup. Next question.
I guess this is a two-part question. The first one is, even before we get to the point where we're meeting with you and you make a decision about whether or not we have a good idea and you're going to fund us, how do we even get that meeting? Like, the way I've been thinking of it, like, when you've written a book, it's really difficult just to get in front of an editor at a publishing house, and I'm looking at it like that. So how do we even network with you and get to meet you or some other angel investor just so you can make that decision? And then the other part of that question is, once we're meeting with you, how do you know that, to continue the book metaphor, how do you know that we're not Harry Potter and we're not J.K. Rowling pitching Harry Potter and you're one of the many publishing houses that passed on her before she created Bloomsbury and Scholastic?
Second part of that's really, really easy. I'm wrong all the time. I'm wrong a lot. And I say that in a very uplifting way. In other words, if an investor tells you no, I don't really think it means that much. I really don't. Because, the Harry Potter example, or Google did not find it terribly easy. I mean, it's a long list of incredibly successful. Pinterest actually could not raise money, and they came out of Y Combinator. They were eating ramen noodles. So I don't think that investors are great signals necessarily. I think what you can do is you can get some free consulting out of them, because if you can get in front of them, then like if you were to pitch me your idea, even though I'm likely to say no, you should work me for what do I really think, and how do I improve it, and what should I do next, what should I be focused on, who do I know, could you introduce me to anyone else, so I wouldn't look at it as a like I get a check or don't get a check event. I think you want to get as much out of it as you can, and with the realization you're probably not going to get a check. But so like, what else can you get? And it's like free consulting. In terms of getting in front of angels, the best, obviously, as silly as it sounds, but networking is the best. And there are events like this, or just someone or whatever. And by the way, I'll give you like a little secret on like that almost always works. If you want to get in front of someone, you're like, hey, I got this good idea. I just want to get your feedback. Right? I fall for that every time. And it's total bullshit. And I know it, but whatever. I fall for it. Because people like to, help out. They might not like to write a check. They maybe not have a check to write at the time. But if, where I think where my defenses go up is when the guy kind of leads with the, I'm fundraising and I'd like to pitch you. I'm like, you and everyone else. you know, my defenses go up, and I'm like, I'm busy. I am busy. You know, everyone's busy. You're busy. You know, but if someone says, hey, got this idea, you know, you know, actually did some homework on me, like, oh, I can see that you're involved with da 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 da. Oh, in my case, you know, you might have to, you know, read the book or whatever. You know, it just like you can't just like come in hot, like, hey, heard you're an angel investor, loved it, you know, pitch you my new idea. Like, no interest whatsoever, zero interest, never going to happen. But unless it comes from a friend, you know, referred deals, obviously, I take a closer look at those. But what I'm sort of taking a long time to explain is, because it's a very important question, and I appreciate it, is like, just get the conversation going. Don't care so much about where it goes. Just like talk and be like a good person to talk to and follow up and be courteous and nice and like do a little research on me before you you know, send me the email. You know what I mean? I've had people pitch me, I'm like, you know, you may not want me as an investor. You know, read my book. You know, you'll find out about who I am, how I think, and everything else. Like, I'll let you know when I get time for that. That's like, you know. I mean, you're willing to take my time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so flip that around. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can you kind of, you know, warm up the lead, so to speak? Do you know what I mean? And don't go in hot asking for stuff. Go in genuinely, I think, looking for help and information, and you know what? People will do it. I'll do it. I'll do it all day long.
So is it really?
I'm doing it now. I mean,
Don't
you know.
ask you for money, but
What's that?
Ask for advice, not money.
Well,
Ask for
yeah,
advice,
look,
not money.
you know, and I know that sounds very counterintuitive, but at some point, you know, you're still going to find out if the person likes the idea, right? If they love it, people are greedy. They want to invest. I think, you know, he's got to write a check. If the person is really an angel investor, he or she, they're going to write a check to somebody. And if your idea is that good, trust me, the checkbook will be flying. You know, but I think also, you know, angel investments, it's fairly uncommon for me to have like a meeting and like, yeah, I'm in. Almost never happen. It'll happen if 3 or 4 of my close acquaintances, angel friends, you know, like they've already done the due diligence and everything else, like, hey, Shirley, take a look, and then I'll go into the meeting, I'll probably make a decision on the spot, more or less. But that's a totally different situation. You know, I just invested in a company I'm super excited about. They're actually in Finland. You know, they were at a show, and I was wearing a hat called a Golf Link, because it's a website I acquired about a year ago. I was wearing a Golf Link hat, and he comes up to me and he says, hey, are you with Golf Link? I'm like, yeah, well, you know, I own the site. Oh, great. Yeah, you know, don't they do this? And anyway, it's just a nice guy. We had a conversation going, and he's like, yeah, we do something very similar, and you know, one thing led to another. You know, I had a couple interactions, had you know, had a meal with him, and ultimately, for various reasons, kind of decided not to invest. But then, you know, turns out I was going to Helsinki for this conference. I'm like, who do I know in Helsinki? Turns out I know these guys. Called them up, and you know, they're great. You know, just incredible follow-up, and it became really obvious that these guys are going to go somewhere. At least I believe so. And so, by the end of it, you know, I made an investment. But that's, you know, that's after, you know, 30 interactions. So you gotta, you know, I think just have the right expectations and really just stay at it. And raising money is hard. I mean, it's very hard. You know, what I usually tell people is try not to need it. You know, it's much easier. By the way, even when companies I'm invested in, they're like, yeah, we're thinking of doing a round. I'm like, do you really need to? The first question I ask, like, why do you need to? Where's the money going to go? What are you going to do with it? Because people are always like, yeah, I'm going to raise. Sounds easy. It's just hard as hell. It's hard to raise money. It's hard. it's hard for me to raise money for my companies. I'm a reasonably well-connected guy. I still, it's hard. It takes a lot of time. And I try and avoid it at all costs. The best way to raise money is don't need it. Don't raise it.
That's great advice. Hey, I just had a quick question. This is great perspective, great talk. I think a lot of kind of the commercial VC world tends to be trend following, a little bit herd mentality.
Sure, they're like any other investors. I'm
just curious, do you look at all at kind of like trends in technology from like an investing thesis, anything that you're looking at in, innovation world that is interesting to you?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. And particularly venture capital firms will tend to actually stake it out. They're like, we're doing this and that, and if you fall in that, great. If not, we're probably not the firm. As an angel investor, I can be a lot more flexible, and I am. My personal criteria is I need to actually understand it. And so I've made investments where I really don't understand it, and they don't tend to work out too well, if at all. And it's a hard discipline for me, but I need to force myself. If I don't understand it, I'm obviously not going to be terribly useful, and then I don't really know what I'm getting into. I think it's a great question. A great example today is artificial intelligence. So I'm incredibly bullish on artificial intelligence. I just met with a really cool firm in town here. That's like great. One of my companies is called GigaOM. We're putting on an artificial intelligence conference in San Francisco in 2 weeks. And I'm kind of convinced we should kind of go in on all in on artificial intelligence with that company. But and my partner, bless his soul, he wants to focus on artificial intelligence, but I actually think it's the right thing. Artificial intelligence is going to be, I'm often asked at events like this, what's the next big thing? To me, no-brainer. It's artificial intelligence. Bigger than robotics, bigger than VR, bigger than everything by a long shot. That's just one man's opinion. But my issue is I don't really understand it. I mean, I understand enough to be dangerous, but I don't really get it. I'd like to understand it a lot better before I make an investment in that area. I think as I look back, I'm a little sorry that I didn't more specifically stake out some particular phenomena that I knew was going to be a big deal and that played out, over 10 years. So, for example, one example is what I call the excess inventory theme. So when the internet came about, it became fairly obvious to me early on that there's this whole play that just did nothing more than utilize excess capacity. Right? So eBay being the classic example, excess shit in my attic. Out it goes. So like a marketplace. And who was I talking to earlier who has a neat idea for machine parts and it's essentially by the way, it's exactly the same thing. And that's why I like your business. I like your odds. They're not easy to get going necessarily, but but that play, that excess inventory play, if you think about it, it's just gone on everywhere, and it's still going on. Right? Just heard about a brand new company, an hour ago, and so I kind of feel like I should have just taken that and one or two other themes I had, and I'll do anything, or I want to look at everything that fits this particular model, and I think maybe I'll do more of that in the future.
So I have a question about right here. So about the J curve, right? So everyone's starting off excited, going down the hill, going through that cold winter.
Yep.
You invested all the money you put all your resources in play, and you're going down the hill to that cold winter.
Yep.
How long, or what are the signs that you would say that I should look for and to keep an idea that I'm on the right track? Now, we have customers buying and everything, but apart from that, we're still not generating profit. I mean, we're losing money. How long should I keep an eye on? What metrics I should look for that could give me a confidence that this cold winter will end and we will have that growth down the line? So is there any signs or metrics I should keep an eye on?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't mean to imply that all these things are like completely black and white. Obviously, there's an awful lot of gray area, and that's your question is a gray area question fundamentally. But I can say this, that like if it's feeling like a real push to get customers, if it's feeling like a real push to get users, and if it's feeling like a real push to get metrics, then I'd say just slow down, cut your burn, and try and figure out how to get your product into something that, as Paul Graham says, something a product people love. Ultimately, people need to love your product. If they don't love it, if they sort of like it, it's hard. It's a hard business. And hey, I've got a few of those, and it's just clear. It's like they don't love it. It's like it's okay, but it's not doing it. And you do end up in that gray area. You're like, well, if I just market a little bit better, the default and probably a little bell should ring when you're like, we just need to market it a little bit better. And I'd say, yeah, probably not. Probably just need a better product. I'm sorry I keep bringing up Elon Musk, but these videos are kind of fresh in my mind. But he's like, we don't do any advertising, none. All goes to the product. Everything goes to the product. And there's obviously most successful new car, a radical new car in a very long time. He's built a product people love. I mean, I have a Tesla, and I think it's a ridiculously good product. It's so far head and shoulders above any other car, in my personal opinion. It's not even close. It's hard to even. Everyone's like, "Are you really? You like it?" Like, oh, dude, it's not even close. Do you know what I mean? So that's why, they're pulling those cars out of his hands, and that's the kind of feeling you want to get. And when you get there, then like lots of things kind of, I think, start taking care of themselves. Then you don't need that marketing person. You don't need those AdWord clicks. Your phone's ringing. And I know I'm throwing that out there as kind of an ideal, but I think it's a good way to think about it. You may not get there, but the closer you get, then you're not going to be asking yourself these questions. The fact that you're asking a question, by the way, is almost certain your product needs more work. And it's tough. I mean, that's hard work. That's Elon was asked, well, where do you spend your time? And you're thinking he's running around finance or car shows or whatever. He's like, we're the product guys. Like that's what he does. He has a COO to actually run the company. I mean, he's technically running the company, but he's like the CEO. But the COO, who's I guess must be a very talented gal. She runs the company actually, and he hangs out with the product guys. That's where he spends all his time. And I say there's like it's a reminder to me. I spend too much time quote running the company, and I personally do not spend enough time at Love to Know, which is my kind of day job venture. We've been around for 13 years, so it's not really a venture anymore. But I don't spend enough time with product. I really believe that, and it's silly. So I've kind of my 2017 New Year's resolution is, I got to make sure at the end of the day I've spent a lot of time with product.
So for the sake of time, we'll have a couple more questions. And
well, thanks by the way. I think this has been a really interesting night. Quick question on the on your gut feeling on the team that's part of an idea, right? At least in my experience, like when you meet talented people, and many times when they have this awesome idea, they're kind of cocky in a way, in a good way.
Yeah, it's actually, it can be mildly obnoxious, but it just turns out to be a pretty good indicator.
But then
It's good. You need a certain amount of confidence.
Of course, I mean,
just
but
not too much. It's tricky.
that's where I want to touch in. Where's that line of the guy who's just like full of himself because he or she has the competency versus your personal desire? I'm just not even though it might be printing money, I might not be willing because of that. Or as an angel, you're like, hey, I don't care. I might hate this guy, but he's gonna make me rich. Do you draw that line in your experience? Is that something that has?
First of all, I'm not going to invest in someone that I hate. It's just, I don't even care if he's going to make me rich. I really don't care. It's not. Life's too short. And I may miss a couple of good deals that way. But you bring up a really interesting point because, by the way, you're right that, and we have my venture partner David Eman, who, by the way, I'm just incredibly lucky to have him as a friend and business partner for 20 years. He's amazing. Again, two's better than one. By the way, most of my solo acts where I write checks and he says no, most of them actually don't work, just for whatever reason. But anyway, to your question, it touches upon something really important. Confidence is a big deal. It's hard to be a founder and not have confidence because it's just too hard. And if you're not reasonably convinced that you can do it, and if you're not reasonably convinced like that you're the person who should do it, I just think when times get really tough, you're going to collapse. And I think so confidence is a big deal. I mean, you look at Larry Ellison. Is this a confident guy?
Yeah.
Obnoxiously so. You could argue, right? I mean, I actually know people who know him. It turns out he's a perfectly wonderful guy. But he, comes across pretty goddamn cocky, right? Bill Gates, think that's a confident guy? Pretty frickin' cocky guy, right? Travis Kalanick, Uber guy. Is this a cocky guy? Very cocky guy, right? So, and I don't say that sort of cocky in a negative way. It's obviously kind of a negative word, but confidence, yeah, to the point of being cocky, for sure. And so it is a good characteristic. I mean, if I hate to say this, but if a founder comes in and they're not really, and they're like totally honest, like, well, I'm not exactly sure, and we're going to try this. It's kind of a non-starter. And I think, yeah, and I think it's a challenge for yeah.
Hello? Oh, great.
You kind of want to be there. If you got a lot of doubts, it's just not a good place to be.
So two things. I heard you said before, and maybe this is just a great way that I could add value from an insight that I got from someone a lot wiser than me. So he's the global head of sustainability for a $1 billion company. He has meetings all the time, and what really helped him focus, and he told me this, is that on his calendar, what he do, because I know you mentioned that you want to spend more time on product.
Yep.
And what he does is he color codes his calendar. So, like for example, say for example he wanted to spend half his time on distribution, half of his time on product. What he would do is he would color code the meetings on his calendar, and 1 week he would have like lots of yellow, and 1 week we would have lots of red, and he would say, okay, well, all the yellow is the time I spent on distribution, and all the red is the time I spent on product. So he's like, okay, well, if I've got more yellow than red, I need to have more red on my calendar next week, and he will just go through it and skim it, and it's just a great way
idea.
to. So that's
great
cool.
idea.
And the second thing is,
and by the way, Steve Jobs, obviously quintessential product guy. They say he was a great marketer and everything, and I suppose he was, but primarily a product guy. And he spent a lot of time on product, a lot of time. Like he's the product manager for like a lot of that stuff, technically. Right?
Yeah, I mean the emphasis on core values. I saw that how he really focuses on, he focused on the core message of Apple. That was really awesome. Now, the second point that I wanted to ask you is, so from what I've noticed, there's like nexus points, and especially for investors. So investors will get their advice and they'll always take calls from a few key people. And from a lot of what I've read, I've noticed that investors, you don't necessarily always want to go to an investor straight up. You want to find somebody that they know that they can recommend you to invest to somebody's opinion that they trust. And I was curious as to the kinds of people that you would take calls from and you would listen to for advice. Are they all angel investors, or are they lawyers, or what are the kinds of people that you would really pay close attention to?
Do you mean in terms of sort of signals for a particular deal?
Yeah, for signals for investments or just particular.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a group of folks I've been doing this with for a very long time. The people who did not have terribly good ideas, like, they're not there anymore. I think they are probably maybe not even angel investing too much anymore. And then some folks who just tend to be, really good, we try and stay close because it's hard. And it's like track record. See, it's the only thing And I good friends of mine at plenty of venture firms, they bring someone in. I mean, they certainly think it's going to work out and everything, and you listen to. And I know many people who this has happened to. Actually, they go to work for venture firms. Great folks, smart, great presentation, got a great rap. Everything's looking good, and they can't make money. And the deals don't work out. And I wish I could, if there was some magic formula for that. I mean, you just don't really know. Track record kind of speaks for itself ultimately.
Is there any specific professions of people that you would? So, for example, I could go on your LinkedIn. I could see a few contacts, and I know that who I'd have to get an introduction from to then get introduced to you, and who I would have to convince first that the idea is worth coming to you with. I mean, almost like. So it's who would I approach for an indirect referral to then have more value in your eyes from?
It's a pretty small crowd.
Okay.
Yeah, I say yes to everyone on LinkedIn, so please join me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
But it's a small crowd.
Okay.
Yeah. There's not that many of them, and there's not enough time to kind of keep up with everyone else. I mean, there's certainly plenty of folks I know who I don't keep up with, but who I've got great respect for. We just don't travel kind of in the same circles. Yeah, it's tough. And it's tough. It's tough being on the other side. It's tough. It's tough trying to weed through. What are for sure in many cases great ideas. I definitely feel the pain of startup folks trying to get in front, but I also feel our pain, we got to, believe it or not, kind of hard too, because you want to see these all and you want to help where you can, but there's only so many hours in the day and only so many dollars in the bank, and ultimately you got to make a decision.
We have one last question, and we're gonna close the session.
Pal. Yeah. Love taking the last question from a guy named Pal.
First, thank you. I totally agree with a few of the points which I was even doubting whether my ideas were correct, and few things which I totally agree, which I believe. One is mainly not going for funding and running the company.
Not going for what?
Funding, yeah, and running the company on your own funds or your Taco Bells. Yeah. That I believed and is being. But I have two portions to the question. One is on the J curve, and the other one is on the partner. In the J curve, frankly, I never read this book, so I'm not sure whether already you explained it on.
You're in good company.
Yeah, and basically on the J curve, when you have the company going not on red, but on black, which means you are making profit, you are sustainable, you are growing organically, but now when you want to take it to the next step, will you go for funding or not?
I think there's a lot of important factors. Number one, is it the kind of business that like if you're going to go for classic venture capital, for example, like there's a very tight profile of what venture capitalists want. You know, they want this thing which is the go big, go big or go home. They don't care if it fails, but they need something that's going to succeed, you know, 1,000 times. It's going to, quote, make the fund, right, the unicorn. And so does your business have that profile? That's, you know, because otherwise you could be wasting your time and their time. They're just not going to do it. I think number two, you know, let's say it's your business, you need to look at it and say, do I really want partners in here? Because, like, you can't get rid of partners. Like, once they're in, like, they don't really leave.
I totally agree with
right?
that point.
So there's going to be a lot of love. And importantly, their expectations and your expectations about, you know, the way the future is going to play out, they need to be pretty tight. Right? So, for example, if you take classic Sandhill Venture Capital, like, you're going public or you're going to be sold. Right? And that bell's going to ring after 7 to 10 years, and it's like, we're moving you, right? Like, it's going to happen. Like, the minute you take Sandhill Venture Capital, you know, you're not going to be a private company. This is not going to happen.
That's absolutely correct. That's why I was asking this question on the partner. The other side of it is, instead of partners, you take the employees who are so close, where you can argue and bring out the best out of you, and where they can stop you where you are going wrong. Still, you have the power to take the decision, as long as you know what you are taking. Will that work?
Will what work? What's exactly is the question?
Instead of the partner. The only reason I was...
Oh, instead of partners...
Instead of partners, the employees who are on the company.
Sure. I mean, at my company, Love to Know, which is near and dear to my heart, needless to say. Online media company, you know, kind of medium size. I love the business. I love it. I love the employees. I have like super strong employees, and yet we don't do options. We're, you know, it's 100% owned by me, which is a nice simplified cap structure. You know? But it's also great for the employees because, like, they know, like, that some investors aren't going to be screwing around with their company, right? They know that, like, they're not going to be sold and out of a job. Like, they know that, you know, as long as I'm not in too bad a mood, like, everything's going to, like, you know, nothing's going to change, you know? And they know if they deal with me that ultimately, like, that's kind of where the buck stops. So there's a lot of, like, super positive things which are, I think, really underrated in today's environment, right? Where you get into the series, you know, XYZ, and, you know, you got these upside down cap tables, and it's a goddamn mess, right? And all you know is when the cap table starts getting too complicated, you only know one thing: you're going to get screwed somehow. I don't know how, but it's going to happen, probably. It's not going to end well. And so, you know, or it's going to be challenging. And so what I had love to know is I just have super strong employees. They're very smart. They are incredibly, they're incredibly competent. They're incredibly smart, and like they give me shit. You know, they push back all the time. Like I would argue too much so, but they do, and I don't shut them down. I occasionally, you know, we just decide something different. But you know, I listen. But they're super strong, and so I feel like I do have partners, and they're not, you know, technically like investment partners or equity partners, but they're partners, and I treat them as such, and with great respect, and I greatly value them and their input, and like, you know, they push back, and I listen almost always. So the answer to your question is yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Howard. It was fantastic. Big round of applause.
Thank you for having me. Awesome. Thank you very much.
So much, and please make sure everybody got your copy of your book, and stay tuned for more events. February 13, we'll have the next one. So have a good night, guys.